How's it going, everyone, and welcome to your second tutorial using Java graphics. In this tutorial I'm going to basically make every single class that we're going to need, and I'm going to take you through key listeners and timers. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is make a new class. So highlight your source folder in the project that you're in and go to new class, and I'm going to name it render just because it's not truly rendering, but it's basically the concept of rendering. So that's why I like to name it. And it's going to extend JPanel. Now we're going to need to import that. I'm going to go ahead and make a constructor. And in this constructor, hold on. In this constructor, since this is a JPanel class basically, it's an object now, I can just go ahead and set background to a color, and to do that you just type in color dot and whatever color. I'm just going to name it black. Wait to import color too. Okay, so the main thing with this, where the real kind of quote-unquote rendering happens, is with this function, public void paint component. And this takes in a graphics object. And one thing we have to not forget, because I do this all the time, is type super dot paint component g. So basically what this is, after we import this, it's actually, if you look over here, this symbol means that it's overriding the original function that, or method in Java, that it's extending. So it's overriding it, and then the first thing we're doing is calling the original one from the superclass. And the reason that we do this is because if we don't, the graphics kind of don't clear after you draw them, and they just get all mixed up with each other. So this kind of acts as a refresh rate sort of thing, so that it's going to clear the screen every time, because we're calling the blank one that's going to clear it in a way. So that's that. And the main reason we're doing this here and not in the JFrame is because if we run this real quick, this space right here, this is just nothing. This has no value. We cannot draw on this really. So we need to add the JPanel, which we can draw on, to this. To do that, before we set visible, actually out here, I'm going to make a private render. I always spell this wrong. And over here we're going to just make the object render equals new render. And then we're going to add render. So that's going to add the component to our JFrame. So now if we run this now, as you can see, the screen is black. So this entire area was added from the JFrame. And yeah, so it's a good start for that. So now we have to think about, we basically just have to kind of brainstorm what we're going to need for this. So if I run this again, we're basically going to need two paddles, one on this side and one on this side. So that's going to be a class called paddle. Then we need a ball, which is going to be its own class. And then we are going to need a score overlay, which we could do right here, but I feel like it would make more sense to make a whole nother class for that too. And we also, if we want to implement a menu later, I'm not going to worry about that right now, but if you want a menu, like say, like, you know, the start, options, and that kind of stuff, we could also do that. And that would be another class. So let's go ahead and make the most generic thing so far, which is going to be our paddle. Just name a class called paddle. And we don't need to make two classes of this, since we can make player 1 a paddle and player 2 a paddle. There's both paddles. They just might have different attributes to them. So the first thing that I'm going to do is make a constructor, paddle. And in this constructor, so a paddle, what is it going to have? So I'm just going to make some comments here. It's going to have an X position. It's going to have a Y position. It's going to have a height. It's going to have a width. So yeah, it's going to have all these, and I believe that that's all we're going to need for now. And we can also have a color. So let me just write that color. So this is what we're going to implement into it. And yeah, so both paddles are going to have that, and that's, so far that looks pretty good. Along the line, like down the road, we might have to add some stuff, but this is the core of what we need. So another class is going to be called ball, and the ball class is going to take almost the same as the paddle, because it's going to, after I make the, hold on, let me make the constructor. It's going to take in an X position, a Y position, and instead of a width and height, a ball has a radius, which is simple enough. And also, let me just see if I can explain this real quick. So the ball is going to be moving, and in regular Pong, you know, as if you hit something, it bounces off at a certain angle. So we want also to set an angle. Now that'll make more sense down the road if you don't get it for now. I mean, it's just basically going to change the direction that the ball's facing. So we have to think about how to do that. We might need to use some trigonometry, but there might be some simpler ways to do it too. And so yeah, and then the last class that's going to be probably the last thing that we do is the score. So I'm just going to make a constructor real quick just to get that out of the way. And we don't really need to worry about this for now, because that's the last thing. That's probably going to be the easiest to do. So as you can see, we have our basic setup of how our program is going to run. And now, before the last thing I'm going to do in this tutorial is show you what is actually going to happen with key listeners and timers. So if we run this right now, this is just running once. This is just going through this paint method once and painting this black once. So we are seeing really just one frame here. There's nothing going on. This is not refreshing right now as a black image. This is just the static image of black. So how do we go about kind of creating a refresh rate? So one way that you're really supposed to do it is to get the time from your computer in nanoseconds and divide that by the amount of like hertz your screen is, so you get 60 frames per second per se. But we're not going to worry about that because this is a simple kind of tutorial. So one thing that we're going to do is make some timers. And what timers really are, they're basically triggers. They're going to send out a signal, and whenever that signal is, like whenever that signal is caught, then that piece of code, that whatever you have in there, is going to run. So the first thing we need to do is implement action listener. Okay. Implement, I can't spell, action listener and key listener. And the key listener, as you can probably tell by the name, it's gonna just, hold on a second. Yeah, there we go. So a key listener, as you can probably tell, is just going to listen to your keyboard, and like whenever it hears a key event, it's going to produce that. So we need to add the unimplemented methods here. So now we have, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 methods. Just doing some cleanup here. I really can't stand those little notes that they put in here, but so the main one that we're going to be worried about is action performed down here. That's going to be where our timers, when they get triggered, this is what's going to run. So I'll start with this down here. So when we run, we want to create a refresh rate. And the simplest way to explain this is a timer basically has nanoseconds. If you want, like, you can specify the amount of nanoseconds you want a timer to go for. So about 50 I found was about decent, or like, you know, you can even go 10, but sometimes like putting them too low is like, you know, it messes with things. So I'm gonna stick with 50, and so up here we're gonna initialize a timer, private timer, and I'm gonna name it the main timer because this is what's gonna be running all the time. So when we create in our constructor for render, this is where I'm gonna initialize everything. So main timer equals, equals new timer, and the parameters of this is an object and the nanoseconds, as I said before. So the first parameter is the nanoseconds, so we can go 50, and now the object that's going to be kind of used by this, and that's just going to be this, because this is the class that we're in, and this is what's going to be using it. Now we have to import the timer, and make sure it's the Java Swing timer. It's the one I always use. So now we made a new timer, and now we want to say we have to actually start the timer, because if we just run this now, it's not going to do anything. We just initialize the timer, but it's not starting. So we just say main timer dot start, and by doing that, it's going to start, and every 50 nanoseconds it's going to trigger this action performed event. Now whatever runs in here is going to be that, but we're going to have multiple timers, so we would have to specify which timer is being triggered. So the event that's getting called is E. So if we have an if statement saying e.get source, which is getting the source of the timer that's called, dot equals, which is comparing two strings, and if we just say main timer, so it's comparing actually objects here, I'm sorry. So it's comparing the main timer to see if it's the same source as the action event. So if the main timer called this, it's going to say is the main timer equal to main timer, which it is. So this is what's going to run. I hope that makes sense. And so now what we're going to do is just make sure that this works. So I'm just going to print something out to the console. Print ln timer. So this will see if it's working. System. Okay. So if everything went well, it should be working. As you can see, it keeps on printing timer to the console down here. It's pretty neat. So we know that that works. Can get rid of this. So that's going to be our refresh rate. And now how do we refresh? What are we trying to refresh? Now remember, this is where all the magic happens with the rendering. I'm going to just put that here. Render. So this is where everything happens. This is where all of our drawing methods are going to go with G, because G is the graphics component. So we want to repaint, really, everything that we do. This is the paint component, and there's actually a method called repaint. So if we just call repaint here, this is going to repaint every 50 nanoseconds. So if you think about that, it's refreshing the screen every 50 nanoseconds, which is a really good refresh rate. Yeah, so that should be that should be explained enough in there. So we basically have our refresh right now, and we can do things with that. And that's basically how a timer works. And now a key listener. So the key listener methods are right here, these three. So key typed is basically if you just type a key real fast, that's key typed. Key pressed is if you're holding a key or if you're pressing it, like once it's pushed down, that's what that means. And key released is when you release a key. So the main two that we're going to be looking at is key released and key pressed. Key typed we don't really need to worry about, but we need it there because it implements the key listener. So I'm just going to do some cleaning up here. Okay. So one thing we have to do now is check if the key is pressed. So the class still doesn't really know. Like it doesn't really have a key listener. It's implementing the key listener, and that's great. And then we have the methods for it, but the class still doesn't know what a key is. Like when you press something, it doesn't know what to do. So the last thing we want to do here, and this is just mandatory basically for this, is add key listener. This. Okay, so that's basically doing the same thing as initializing as like main timer.start. We're gonna start adding a key listener to this now. So we basically now are listening to every key that's pressed, and now these methods can be used. So that's basically the gist of action listener and key listener. Action listener is for the timers, and key listener is for the keyboard keys. I don't want to put anything into here yet because we haven't really initialized. We don't really know what keys we want to press yet and how they're going to act with the paddles and all that. So I hope that you get the idea behind all this, and in the next tutorial we're going to start making the paddles and the ball. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.